But here we are, yes.
Yeah.
And for those of you that are watching, I'm wearing the Robertson racing hat, and Scott's got the YawSpeed hat on. So we're kind of changing it up here a little bit. But
Yeah, so to introduce ourselves, if some of you don't know who we are, my name is Scott Robertson from Robertson Racing, but wearing the YawSpeed hat. And
yeah, and I'm
this,
Aric from YawSpeed, Aric Streeter.
and
Go ahead, Scott.
we're going to be your entertainment for the evening. We had a few last minute people sign up, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this as I speak. So this, like I said in the email, this recording will be available to you as soon as I upload it and send out the link and stuff. We also have this little slide presentation that we're going to be kind of thumbing through as well. We will email that to you as well. If you're new to Discord and things like that, you've got 3 screens. You've got me, Aric, and then the slide or data screen, as it will kind of become. If you want to make those bigger, just click the window you want to make bigger, and that'll be bigger. And, if you want to watch one of us while we're not talking, like pick our nose or something, that may happen. So here we are.
No promises, right?
Yeah. But yeah, if you guys want to check in, introduce yourselves and where you're from, that would be cool to see.
In the chat.
In the chat, yep.
Yeah, I see some names I recognize.
Jake Martin told me about donuts with gravy on top, and I mean, I'll try anything.
Canadian? That sounds like a Canadian thing.
I mean, I'll try anything.
They put gravy on stuff. Or English people, I don't know.
Yeah. What's up, Colin?
Northern Indiana.
Colin is local to me, too. Natalie. Oh, Natalie, you're closer than I thought. You're in Northern Indiana.
Chris, he's close to me in Detroit.
Yep. Good buddy Emmett. Adam Cook in Holland, Michigan as well. Well, we got a lot of locals here. Aric from South Carolina. Welcome, Aric.
Hey, Rory's here. Hey, Rory.
Previously from Sunday Cup. He's retired now, by the way.
Is he retired? Is he going to join GLTC? I heard something like that.
Ooh, that'd be interesting.
I don't know.
Jake from Indy. Kevin, frequent paddock neighbor. It's true. GLTC, really. There it is. Joe King from Westover. Very good. And Walt from GR. Nice. Very good. A lot of West Michigan and Midwest people, of course, but glad you all are here. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. This was kind of a brainchild of Aric and mine for a little while now. Our goal is to basically, we think that data can be very, very helpful and very useful, but there are some pitfalls that we see most drivers fall into. And essentially, we really wanted to help it be easy, straightforward, but also use our time well. And we'll kind of get into all that sort of thing here shortly, but we're glad you guys are here. So let's go ahead and get into it.
All right, let's start the slide deck. Yeah, so we'll kind of keep this relatively brief. We are going to be going back and forth after the first few slides with a live data analysis demo that Scott's got queued up using his phone and his Apex Pro. So once we do the first few slides here, we'll kind of go back and forth on checking slide notes and doing that demo. Yeah, so what's data, right? Data is everywhere. Everybody talks about data, especially when it comes to driving these days. It's very accessible, but as Scott mentioned, we see some common pitfalls that people fall into. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people have like some sort of data logging system when they're out on track these days, whether it's an AIM Solo 2, a Apex Pro V-Box, something like that. At the high level, from my perspective, what I see people doing, and I think Scott will agree, and I think this is kind of the genesis of why we put this together, was a lot of times people use their data loggers as glorified lap timers. And not that that's bad, right? I mean, especially lap timers that have the ability to look at predictive laps or, plus and minus where you were
Right.
from your, baseline lap, or lights in the case of the Apex Pro. Those are very useful, and those are, obviously when you're on track and driving, those are really about the only, data type things that you can look at. But so not to take away from that, I mean, many people don't really look beyond that.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
it seems like a waste, right? I mean, some of these data devices that we buy are anywhere from 300 to a couple grand, depending. And that just doesn't seem like the best use of what we've got. So too often we see people, everybody's saying you got to get data, you got to get data, you got to get data, but then they just sit in the car and they simply show us pluses and minuses and our lap times.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of that. I mean, myself included. Even though I'm kind of a data guy at heart. I mean, when you're at an event, a lot of it is, you're there socially, right? You want to have fun. You want to, maybe you have time or want to wrench on your car. I hate working on cars at tracks, but that's neither here nor there. But there's a lot of other things going on while you're at the track. But one of the things we want to kind of highlight is that you really have to, and we'd cover this in a little bit later slide, but you really have to be used to your data system before you get to the track. The time to learn how to use your data analysis tools is not when you're at the track, because 99 times out of 100, you're not going to be looking at that data. So just kind of digging into, not to spend too much time on this individual slide, but, these are the types of data that you'll see. Most people, when they talk about driving data, they're talking about, timing data, lap timers, GPS enabled data, that you'll get from your Solo 2, Solo, or, VBox or that sort of thing. Video is obviously becoming more of a thing too. Obviously there's some costs associated with that, and we're going to get into a little bit of detail on how to use video data correctly. There's specific ways to make sure that the data is useful. If from a video perspective, if, for example, you can't see anything other than the track in front of the car, it's not going to be very useful, right? So we have some kind of tips and tricks on that we'll just briefly go over as far as placement of cameras in the car. Tire data, that's its own thing. I think here coming up, I know Scott had talked about maybe doing a tire data session. Here in the near future. Tire data, if you look at it from what you can do at the track perspective, a lot of times if you didn't bring a alignment rack, the only thing you're going to be able to do while you're at your event is mess with your tire pressures and associated temperatures with that. So that'll be its own kind of standalone. Scott invites me to attend that or present that with him. I'd be more than happy to do that, because tires are the only thing that touches the ground, right, when you're driving a car. And then we'll briefly touch ECU and car level data. This would be like OBD2 or CAN level interfaces if you're running like a standalone ECU. Driver physiology data, you'll see this in a lot of pro sports, right? Especially ones that deal with physical fitness. But from a driving perspective, this is becoming much more commonly used, where you're looking at vision, where are the drivers looking, breathing, heart rate, perspiration. Those can all be really good indicators of what the workload that the driver is experiencing in the car. Lower level stuff, we obviously won't get into that in this particular presentation. We're focusing, again, as I mentioned, on mostly GPS based stuff. But then the last thing to mention is weather data. Way more important than people think. I mean, obviously people think in terms of wet laps or dry laps. Most data loggers these days, when you're saving your data off, will allow you to make notes on weather. I always try to do that, because if you're looking at a lap and comparing to a lap from a different day or different weather condition, obviously, sometimes they can't be comparable. And so to put notes as far as what the prevailing weather conditions are when you're on track gives you that last little bit of information that is useful when you're doing the analysis. Anything more on this slide, Scott?
No, we effectively wanted to share how much and how the different kinds of data that's out there, um, because really the limiting factor is not the amount of data that we can collect, which is immense. What the limiting factor is how much time we have to look at it and to interpret it. And so it's clear that one of these things is greater than the other. So that's why we're here.
Yep. All right, good deal. All right, so next slide. So what are we focused on today? I mentioned this a couple times already. GPS-enabled data. I mean, GPS or GNSS, global positioning satellite systems are, very common. They're relatively mature from a use perspective, at least in the car, where, you have a wide variety of data loggers that are available these days with GPS data of sufficient resolution. And by resolution, I mean time, where you're collecting data states, as far as the position of your car, the speed of your car, different accelerations, rate of change of yaw or turning, kind of real time, right? I mean, this kind of stuff comes for free basically with these highly integrated GPS receivers that are in data loggers these days. So there's a wealth of data there. All the other stuff that we're going to kind of mention, I mentioned like ECU and car level data. Those are good ways to augment GPS data, but there's a lot you can do with GPS data. One thing that you'll kind of hear us talk about a few times here is when you're looking at data channels, and we do talk a little bit about what a data channel is it actionable? Is it something you can actually do something with? One pitfall with data is, as Scott mentioned on the previous slide, the problem is not the amount of data you have. It's looking at what the data represents and how to actually act upon the data. And I think Scott's got a slide here coming up where we get into a little bit more of the philosophical discussion behind that. Just briefly, and I mentioned this, so I'll go through this one quickly. ECU car level data, that can be very useful to add to GPS data. It augments your GPS drive data with data from your car, either via like an OBD2 interface for most new cars. And a lot of cars have like, a lot of data in there, including like brake pressures and stuff that are kind of, historically more difficult to access, given, the cost of data acquisition systems that include brake pressure. But just to mention that as an aside, if you have OBD2 or CAN, it's a good idea to integrate that with your data system. Again, the word actionable, right? I mean, there's plenty of data streams on an OBD2 interface or a CAN interface, but which ones are useful?
So here's how we would like to kind of talk about this. Is that we're going to be looking at the Apex Pro platform, but this is by no means a commercial for Apex Pro. This is for any data device that you may have. I do know that we've got at least one member in here who is using something like a Harry's lap timer, but has one of those external high hertz GPS receivers. Which
and just
is,
if I can mention on those, I've used those personally. That basically turns Harry's into a very I guess adequate, I should say, data analysis thing. Without the external GPS, there's a limit to the level of use. But if you have a 10 hertz GPS, I mean, there's a lot of those out there. That can definitely be a good way to get into data collection and logging at a relatively cheap price point. So sorry, I interrupted, Scott, but I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that certainly is an option that's out there. So, but any of the phone-based data apps that anybody may have or want to share with you and things like that really needs to be taken with a grain of salt. So just keep that in mind, because phone GPS are 1 hertz, which means 1 time per second data is captured. So if you think about when you're on the back straight at 100 miles an hour, I didn't do the quick math on this, but in 1 second at 100 miles an hour, you're covering some distance. Things have changed. So it's just not going to be terribly helpful. And even a lap timer that's at 1 hertz is at best going to be within 1 second. And oftentimes when we're looking at trying to get our laps down to tenths, if not hundredths, 1 hertz isn't going to really cut it. Yeah, Jake Martin mentioned in the chat 25 hertz devices. They're out there. They're very good. Again,
Yeah.
more hertz is going to be clearer data.
Yeah, for sure, and you'll see that tech trend continue too. In my day job, I work a little bit on electronic technology and integrated ICs and that kind of thing, and that stuff's accelerating. I mean, you're going to see 10 years ago, 10 hertz was difficult to get. Now, most receivers have the ability to process data at 20 hertz. So, as Scott mentioned, I mean, the better, more hertz, more data you get, the better you're able to look at your data and use it.
Okay. So again, just to kind of finish wrapping up what we're going to look at, the way we've kind of broken this down is in time allotments. So if you've got 5 minutes, and not just like, do you have 5 minutes, but can you set aside 5 minutes? And if you can set aside 5 minutes, this is what to look for. Okay, are you willing to set aside 15 minutes? Good. These are the things that you can then look at, and then 30 minutes. And we wanted to add the in-between events as well, because oftentimes, and I can be just as guilty as anyone in this as well, is that I don't necessarily open my data logger in between events. But there's a lot to be learned in between events, especially if you set up your car specifically from one track to another, or you're trying to work on some skills of yours. It can help remind you to see the slopes that we're going to be taking a look at.
Yeah, I just want to mention too, as far as like between events data analysis, the time to look at your data in more detail is right after the event. Unless you do data in and day in and day out. I mean, even those of us who look at data analysis, environments relatively, I guess, regularly, right? I mean, you learn, basically it's like a language, right? I mean, if you're not practicing it, you're going to lose it. And especially if you're the one that's driven at that event, if you look at the data right after the event, you're going to learn a lot more just from a general perspective. So sorry to interrupt it again, Scott.
No, you're good. Let's do the next one.
All right. Oh yeah, we got to mention the interpretive dance if we have time. I guess we're gonna have to stop babbling as much as we are, though.
I was gonna skip over that.
Great.
Do my little hand dance.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so this is an important part that I wanted to note just as we talk about data, is that oftentimes you'll see some data collection devices talk about that they can be coaches, and something like the Garmin that can be helpful. But oftentimes what data is that it is descriptive. It is not prescriptive. And I'd like to kind of talk about the difference there. In that data is telling you what is happening, what you're doing on the brakes, what you're doing with your steering, how fast the car is going, where the car is going, all this sort of stuff. But as you're comparing laps and you're trying to see what's going to be faster, how to be faster, what to do next, data doesn't tell you that. Data can tell you if one thing is faster than the other, but it can't tell you how to do that. Data can't tell you how to release the brake pedal in a way that's going to be best for you and your car in those given circumstances. As we looked at, collecting data is super easy. You can collect so much data you will never ever be able to look through it all. But interpreting data, that's what we're really here to talk about today. So when we talk about data collection and hey, I'm going to go look at my data, you can look at your data, but if you want to apply it, you have to do the interpretation work. See what you need to do based on that data that we're looking at. As an example, that data can show you, and data is actually very good at showing you when you're braking too early or when you're braking later, things like that. But It can't tell you which one is going to be faster or better in all the situations. That's where you have to do your interpretation. I think Aric mentioned this earlier. Just be familiar with what data you're using. Don't let the racetrack be the first time you open it. Again, we're going to be getting pretty specific in here in terms of the different things to look at depending on how much time you have. So it's even going into an event. If you're saying, all right, I'm just going to start with the 5 minutes, and that's all I'm going to do this weekend. It's right, after my sessions, I'm going to take a look at my data for 5 minutes after every single one. And so then the amount of things to look at is very small. So the familiarity that you need is pretty low. It's easy. So start there. Start easy. Don't dive into the deep end too soon. All right. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah, I did want to mention just real quick before we leave this slide, the last sentence here, get some reference data, lab from friends in practice. It kind of goes to the same point that, Scott and I made earlier, right? Make sure that you know how to use your analysis tools, but you'll see once Scott gets into the demo, a lot of times what you're doing is you're comparing a lap or a few laps versus like something that's a reference, right? Let's say a hot shoe drove your same car during that same event, right? You might want to compare to that. Or let's say you had, a really good feeling session and you knew the second half of your lap was quicker than the fastest lap that you took, were able to drive during the day. You're almost always making A/B comparisons. So the more reference laps you have from either similar equipment or identical equipment, is always useful. And there's a lot of forums out there that have data repositories for different things. Fire Labs is a good one, right? There's basically they use crowdsourcing for a lot of their data collection. So basically, if you're a member of Fire Labs, you can access almost everybody's data, right? I mean, it's basically kind of open source in that way. But there's a lot of other resources online in Facebook and that sort of thing. So, all right.
For sure.
Okay, all right. So GPS enabled data logging.
Yeah, real quick, if I could, Aric. Before we get into the specific channels that we're going to be looking at, I want to kind of hit you guys with a couple ideas. First, that oftentimes when we have a task ahead of us, is we want to get the task done no matter the amount of time. So when we're working on our car, we're going to change our brakes and we're going to work on it until we change our brakes. However long that is, we're going to do it. The problem that if I'm repeating myself, it's for good reason here, is that there's so much data, you can sit down and you can spend hours after every single session. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have hours in between every single session. I've got to take care of my car. I'd like to hang out with my friends, get something to eat, go to the bathroom, take off my sweaty suit, go instruct, go coach somebody else, something like that. There's always something to do. So instead of taking the approach of I'm going to do this until it is done, I'd like you guys to approach it in this is how much time I'm going to devote to this, and then I'm done. So sit down, even on your phones, everybody's got one of those timers on your phone. Set a 5-minute timer, click start, look at your data. Once your 5 minutes is over, be done. Go do something else for a little while. This not only will kind of help you stay focused, but it'll kind of be refreshing in that just glean what you can in 5 minutes, then go do something else. If you've got 15 minutes to set aside, cool, same thing. Set your timer, go do it. You don't have to do data to completion because, spoiler alert, you can't. So spend the amount of time that you're willing to. The second quick thought here is that oftentimes you'll see the people who do look at their data, which is kind of few and far between. it's kind of like an individual thing. Like it's almost lonely just to go look at your own data. And so use it as a way to build community or build a friendship. Like say, hey, I'm going to look at my data. Do you want to come hang out with me? And as you're talking through it in your 5, 15, 30-minute block, whatever it is, you'll learn more as you're explaining it. Or if your friend brings some data, look at their data too. You can learn a lot by looking at other people's data. It's all of a sudden like it's not you, so you have a little bit more perspective on kind of what's happening. Make it a group thing. Data is most fun when done in groups because you all can make fun of each other, you can razz each other, but then you can always like spot some differences. And don't be afraid of asking questions in those scenarios. That is, again, that's where learning is done. So,
Yeah.
again, just encourage you guys, block out your time, not to completion, because you can't. You can't, just like you can't win racing, you can't review all the data. Set aside your time, make it a group effort, and it will be very, very much more enjoyable than most people do.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing along those lines too, I wanted to mention, once you start looking at data in groups, a lot of the kind of ego aspects of driving kind of fall away.
Yes.
Because I mean, data kind of lays everything bare, but I mean, like I think, especially if you have kind of a core group of people that you're, paddocking with, or you get to know, that stuff goes away as soon as you start looking at data in more detail. I mean, you'll likely find that you enjoy that interface. That's what I've found with a lot of people. Some people kind of shy away from data because they don't want to, kind of put it all out there. But group data analysis is a very valuable thing. Just to kind of second the points that Scott was making.
All right.
All right, want to get into this slide then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, all right. So yeah, let's real quickly. So I mentioned time gain and loss before. This is really the only, as I mentioned, the real-time indication if you're using your data logger and it has indications that you can actually see while you're driving, while you're on track. It's also the common kind of denominator when you're looking at data, comparing data after the fact. When you're doing your analysis in your 5, 15, 30-minute segments, you're oftentimes comparing laps, looking at delta times, time gain and loss, from lap to lap. That's a lot of times where you learn things. And when you're in that environment, looking at that, the channel or the trace you normally look at first will be speed, because speed versus distance is basically how you develop lap time. So that's going to be the main focus, especially on the smaller duration time crunches that we've defined. To look at the speed trace first. Scott will have, during his demo, Apex scores, and he'll probably show that a little bit kind of real time once he has a demo up. But that's something that's unique to the Apex Pro. It's very useful. It basically gives you a good indication on how well you're driving versus your car's ultimate G limits. So how hard are you cornering versus how the device has determined that your car can turn, for example, or braking or accelerating. I mentioned RPM throttle and braking before. We'll go into a little bit more detail about those later. And then obviously lateral Gs, longitudinal Gs, but those are lateral means side to side. So that's basically the loads or the forces that are developed on the car while you're turning. Longitudinal is going to be braking or accelerating. And then your yaw rate or your yaw speed is going to be the rate at which your car turns. And Scott uses a pretty good analogy for this. If you look at your car from the very top, put a pin through it, and you can basically see it turning. How quickly is that turning? The units on that is usually like degrees per second. So how rapidly is it changing its direction? And that type of data can be really good to look at, like timing of inputs and what the car is doing relative to what the driver's trying to get it to do, for example.
Correct.
All right, and then squiggles. I think this one's yours, Scott, right?
Yeah, so the way we'd like to encourage you to look at data is going to be in 3 clumps. The first clump is listed second here, but the first thing to look at whenever we're looking at these squiggly lines and dots that we're going to be taking a look at is the timing. If you're taking notes, this would be a good one to write down. So number one is going to be timing. Simply where things happen. Like if you're looking at two slopes, we'll be looking at it on data here shortly. But when you're looking at your data, when does something happen? That's your timing. Does it happen earlier? Does it happen later? That's our timing. The second thing is going to be the slope. Again, with our squiggles and lines and graphs and things, your slope is simply how steep something is vertically, ascending or descending, how steep it is. And this is just the severity or the how fast something happens. Rate of change. Almost. It's not quite to that function yet. But yes, that'll be third jig. So the slope is simply how fast you're braking, how fast you're accelerating, how hard you're turning, things of this nature. And finally, it's going to be the shape. Now the shapes are kind of getting a little bit more into the details, but it's going to be important as well. The shapes are what transitions one thing into another. So at the bottom and the top of our speed trace, in our lateral G lines that we're going to be taking a look at and things like that. Sometimes you want to see a really sharp bottom. Sometimes you want to see a really smooth top. That changes, and some of those are better in some circumstances than others. So those are the three things we really want to encourage you to kind of as a rubric when you're looking at data. First is going to be timing, when things happen. Second is going to be slopes, how severe, how quick is this rate. Third is going to be the shape or the transitions in between these different actions. And what things should look like, what they shouldn't, it's pretty subjective. Again, data doesn't tell us which is right, but it's just telling us what's happening. So some of this is going to have to come from feedback, looking back at your video maybe, and gaining more experience and, again, talking with others. Okay.
All right, next slide. All right, so just a little bit more on ECU car level data and where that can be useful. Again, I mean, most modern cars have an OBD2 interface, and a lot of the data hardware that you're going to see, will have options for a data interface to like an ECU or a car OBD2 interface. The primary things that are going to be useful there, again, I mean, there's the huge amount of data that's on these things, but just to kind of, simplify it to things that are going to be useful to look at when you're looking at optimizing your car or you're driving, are going to be throttle position, what the driver's doing, with or to the car, and when, is he being honest, right? I took that corner flat out. Did you? All right, let's look at it. RPM, right? I mean, obviously engines are going to develop different power levels at different RPMs. You're going to want to make sure that the driver is shifting properly, that they're keeping the engine in its power band, so having an RPM channel is useful. Brake pressure, although that's not commonly available, there are ways to estimate that with what's called a math channel, basically where you calculate things, based on some of the GPS data, to kind of estimate what brake pressures look like and brake release looks like specifically. We probably won't get into brake release, in a lot of detail in this particular presentation, because that's a kind of a subject in and of itself. But there's a lot of subtlety there and a lot of time to be made up by looking at brake behavior, how the driver is actually working with the pedals and what the results are from a car perspective. And then steering input and yaw rate. How harmoniously is the driver using the steering wheel, in addition to the throttle and brake pedals. One good thing with OBD2 interfaces, a lot of times yaw rate and steering angle are actually part of that. A little bit lower detail or more detail than we're going to go through in this particular presentation. But if you have an OBD2 interface, I highly recommend using that as part of your data analysis and learning.
Excellent.
All right, we're getting into the crunches.
Yep, let's do it. All right, so I'll just talk through the slide briefly, and then we'll start taking a look at our actual data here. So 5 minutes. Again, this is kind of where your notes would come in. If you're a handwriter like me, I have to write things down, especially in my own words, which is what I was hopefully encouraging you to do with your notes, is to write things down in your own words. It really helps it commit to long-term memory. So in 5 minutes, again, set aside your 5 minutes. It's going to be important. First thing you're going to do is you're going to compare your fastest 2 or 3 laps. Now I say 2 or 3 because oftentimes what I see is that the fastest lap wasn't the overall best lap that you did. Odds are it was okay, but you really nailed this one corner leading onto a super long straightaway, or a really high speed corner, kind of the big ones. But the rest of the lap was just kind of mediocre. So it's still good to kind of point out and notice where you did well, but bring in your second and your third fastest lap, because oftentimes those two, especially if you're getting at the point you're driving, when you're starting to really kind of narrow down on your lap times and you're not gaining seconds anymore, but you're gaining tenths. That's when bringing in those other laps, you can start to notice, wow, actually on my third fastest lap, that was actually my best overall lap. I just really messed up this one corner, which kind of killed my lap time. So really, those laps might be your best to take a look at. In your 5 minutes, again, speed trace is going to be your biggest friend. Once you start to take a look and start to recognize more of this timing slope shape that we were talking about, it can really help kind of identify a lot of issues all at once just by looking at the speed trace. But you kind of have to know what you're looking for, and we'll talk about some of that tonight. Time and loss gain channel. This is kind of one of my secret weapons. Like if you only have 5 minutes to set aside and you're going to look at this and do this, time gain loss is often where I go to first. This highlights where you really did well, where you're really losing out to yourself or to your reference lap. It can really kind of pin down very quickly where the lowest hanging fruit is for you to focus next. Lastly, if you do have an Apex Pro or are looking at it, the Apex score or coloring on the map that we'll take a look at, the Apex score is simply, are you using all of the tire's grip at any given point on track? On the straightaways, obviously not very much, but then it's great under braking and in corners. It really kind of highlights where you're leaving stuff on the table. Or if you use a lot of your tires on entry but not a lot on exit, that could point to a few things as well. So that kind of higher level can help to point things out. So we're going to disconnect that, and then I'm going to share my phone. Now, just so you know, this is, here we go. Well, maybe later. There we go. Is that working? Oh, come on. Let's try that again. My apologies. It really wants to sell me something, and I really don't want to buy it. All right. You'll see me turn my phone sideways versus vertically sometimes, so I hope that doesn't throw you guys off at all. So this is Mid-Ohio. It's one of my favorite tracks, and it's great. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to pull up our fastest 2 or 3 laps just like we talked about. So all the way down here at the bottom, I'm a last lap hero typically, so my fastest laps tend to be right towards the end. So on this particular app, I'm just going to select my fastest lap, and then I'm going to find my next fastest, which looks like it's all the way back up here. Select that, and then we're going to look at the speed trace. So if you'll notice right under this fancy little graph of ours, you'll see distance versus speed. Those are the two things we're looking at. So as we go from left to right, we're looking how far we travel. And then as we're looking from top to bottom, we're looking at how fast we're going. Now I think if you take a look at this like that, probably be easier for you, you can spot a few changes or a few differences between the laps. Certainly right here, we can notice that there's a bit of gain down this straightaway, which at Mid-Ohio is after turn 1 going into the keyhole. The other big two are going to be a little later in the lap, where we lost a little speed here, and then this corner was certainly different. And then again, all the way over here, quite a bit of a difference. Now, this was during a race, so I would like to think that there's some passing going on, hopefully by me, but maybe on me at the same time. But regardless, these are the kinds of differences that we're looking at. I'm going to go vertical again here. So we're going to deselect that second fastest lap, and let's go to our third fastest lap, which will be here. Now again, interesting to note that the differences are much more subtle here. We don't have that loss that we saw through here. Lines seem very on top of each other, except for visually maybe right down here and a little bit going into the high-speed left-hander. So, great way to identify the differences is going to be, we're going to grab this center scroll right here, and we're just simply going to go gain and loss. So now, left to right, we're looking at distance. Up and down, we're looking at gains versus loss. So, anytime the graph goes up, that means our fast lap is getting faster. Anytime it goes down, it means our second fastest lap was faster. And I think you'll note that there are several places where my second fastest lap was actually quicker. Most notably, really from the start through turn 1. Sorry, let me turn it here. And you can see this little track map right here that'll kind of help walk us through this. So actually down the main straight through turn 1 and all the way into keyhole, my second fastest lap was a quarter of a second faster than my fastest lap. So where did I make the time? Made up the time, we can see right in the keyhole starting. Got a really good run out of keyhole. And then kind of came straight. But just in that little bit, you can see that I made up all of that time that I lost in turn 1 throughout. And again, anytime it goes up, my fastest lap was getting faster than my second fastest. So right through here, into China Beach, all the way back through the S's, and into Thunder Valley was faster. Lost some time in Thunder Valley, but gained a bunch of time through turn 13 and into the carousel. So these would identify, to me, that the low-hanging fruit between these two particular laps would be in keyhole, right here, and then enter under the braking zone into China Beach and up and over the S's and all the way through there. That entire section, which is a lot of stuff happening, is worth 0.42 seconds. And you can see that by the number at the very top right. You can see time delta between laps. Where I'm pointed, it's showing us at 4.2. The other really big jump is right here at turn 13, fast left-hander, all the way into the carousel. That's worth another quarter of a second. It's pretty big. So, Robert, I see your request. If you could type something in, and if it's super pertaining to this, we can take a look. And if not, we can hold on to your question. We'll get you at the end for sure. So, second fastest lap, different story, right? We kind of expected this. Again, we're still looking at gain and loss. Same thing right here at the keyhole. So that's something to kind of note, that in both laps, where we've made up time has been in the keyhole. So we're doing something right there, something faster there in our fast lap compared to our laps that were a little bit slower. Then again, we come into and over China Beach. We're still gaining on ourselves there. So again, that would be number 2. You're doing something well there. And then once more going into Thunder Valley. So those just simply, I use that to simply highlight in the data the low-hanging fruit. What do I need to focus on? What do I need to keep doing? And in this case, whatever I was doing in keyhole was really working for me. It's worth quarter of a second or more just in that one turn. All right, so we're going to go back to our speed channel. And I think you'll note that it's really hard to see, even if I do this, it's really hard to see that I'm actually making up that much time in keyhole because those two lines look really on top of each other. But as I scroll down, take a look at where our dots form. See how the red is coming well lower than the blue, right? We talked about the timing. So blue braked later and a little bit lighter right in through there. Because again, we're looking at the timing when things happen. So the blue brakes later and the severity, red brakes a lot harder until right about there, then things start closing up. And that, believe it or not, is worth a quarter of a second.
I think one thing, if I can, Scott, I wanted to mention about braking in general.
Please.
A lot of times when you look at an okay driver versus a good driver, a lot of those differences are going to be seen in braking, whether it's initial brake application or how they're releasing and using the brakes into corners. And by brake application, I did want to highlight too, it's completely the opposite of what you want to do on the street, right? Where typically you kind of ease into the brakes and you'll peak out at a decel rate or a pedal pressure and then kind of back off. Almost any car, I dare say any car, you can be on the brakes immediately way quicker than you probably think you can, right? Tires are pretty resilient when it comes to building up G's. And you'll see a good brake curve be really, really sharp at the end of an acceleration on a straight, and you can see that in Scott's data, where the speed kind of it increases. Obviously, it's going to taper off as a function of aerodynamic drag and other drag on the car, but when he applies the brakes, you should see an abrupt change in that. So I just want to clarify that. And then, obviously, brake release is a thing in and of itself, and we'll probably get into that in a follow-up video. But just wanted to mention that while we're on this topic.
Exactly. Now, if we go back to our speed trace data here, what I've done is I have selected my fastest lap from Mid-Ohio during a race, and a lap where Tom drove my car and during a fun race, and all of a sudden, we can see some differences, right? It's almost a little bit better when you see it there. If you can see it on a graph like this, you know it's a really big difference. Now, keep in mind on these graphs, just if you can't really see the difference doesn't mean that it's not a big deal. Like we just saw, the brake trace between one lap and another can be right on top of each other, and yet it can be worth almost a half a second at some times. So just because it looks like a thing, switch over to your gain loss channel, take a look, that will tell you. All right, so at our data, it's always good to highlight the fact that high-speed corners and straightaways are more valuable in terms of time than slow-speed corners are because of the amount of distance that you are traveling. So the faster you go, the more distance you travel, the bigger of a deal it is. So 1 mile an hour from 99 to 100 is a bigger deal than a low speed corner from 30 to 31. Still good, still a 1 mile an hour difference, but it's a bigger difference at speed. Now I say that because Tom absolutely kicked my ass in turn one. Surprise, surprise. So again, we're going to look at when things happen first. So we can see here Tom is in red, I am in blue. I start to decelerate. I do a lift here in turn one pretty early. Tom keeps going like he does. And then we can see the severity, the slope after that. You can see mine's pretty gentle. And Tom does a pretty, I don't want to even say abrupt, but a more abrupt decel than I do. But then he stops decelerating and carries all of this speed, and it follows him all the way up into Keyhole, where he and I actually brake at the same time and actually brake harder than him into Keyhole. So just in this little bit, again, high speed corner leading into a straightaway, what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to the center channel to gain and loss. And we can see through turn one all the way into Keyhole is worth half a second. So yes, it's high speed is a thing.
Yeah, we're back. Can you go back on this one, turn it sideways if you could, Scott? So like as we're looking at that turn one behavior there on the two different laps, one thing I wanted to mention too is that's a high speed corner, right? So like turn one at Mid-Ohio, depending on the car, you're probably between 80 and 90 plus miles per hour through there. So very high speed corner. Generally what you want to see in a high speed corner, and it's hard to do as a driver, right? Because there's a fear aspect to a lot of high speed corners, depending on the corner and the track. But carrying speed and maintaining speed through a high speed corner is something to look at. You can see Tom O'Gorman's lap here. It basically maintains that same speed during the corner. That most times, obviously, because it's going to depend on the corner specifics. But if it's a flat corner, high speed corner, you're generally going to want to keep, or want to see that the speed of the car doesn't change much during that corner. It's going to keep it a lot more settled. High speed, balance and that kind of thing on cars is probably a little bit above, this particular, session on the seminar series here. But just wanted to mention that.
Yes.
And I see a comment here too.
Yep.
Let's see.
So at speed, this is like one of those fundamental laws of physics. At speed, high speed that is, a car is more willing to do a direction change than at slow speed. So that means generally speaking, your steering inputs, your need to be a little bit smoother because the car wants to turn. You don't have to turn it as much, it just kind of wants to go. But that also is what enables you at higher speeds to really hammer down on the brake, because the car wants to change direction. You've got all this energy and it wants to do something. So that's why when we talk about shape, that third thing to look at with data, at high speed turns, you generally want to see a much more U-like shape right in here. And mine's not bad, but you can definitely see where the benefit is to the effect of half a second, and that's, you know, only in this one. And I was
Yeah, that's
close.
big.
I was closer to Tom here than I expected to be, but definitely some time to be had. Um, okay, so I want to take a look at real quick. We're going to take a look at our Apex score. So I like to do that from the track map itself. Sorry, gonna make you guys dizzy. Gonna go to your colored by Apex. So this is my lap again. And we're gonna zoom in. Since we've identified keyhole as being one of those big deals, is coming into keyhole right in here. Now you can kind of see this little faux Apex light that my device has on the inside. I'm not going to spend a ton of time because I know not all of you use the Apex Pro. But it's great in the braking zones because anytime it's green means that I'm using a lot of the tire's ability to do things. When it's not, I'm not. So I think it's interesting to note that coming into the braking zone, you can see me start to decel. And you've got the number there on your left, the 0.53, just under the position colored by Apex. So I'm starting to use the brakes, use them a little bit more, but then you can see it goes back to red, and you can see that I'm using the brakes less through here. And then I'm starting to turn and do the work, and all of a sudden it climbs to the 9s and 8s, you know, all those good numbers we want to see. But you can definitely see how right in here, I'm leaving grip on the table. So that's something that can hint to me that maybe I can carry more speed in, and I can do that through a variety of ways, but that I'm definitely leaving some stuff on the table. So that's the Apex channel that we talked about, but I think that'll probably do it for 5 minutes. Now, a lot of info in a short amount of time, but biggest things, again, you're going to be looking for the timing of your data, you're going to be looking for the slope severity, and then you're going to be looking for those shapes. Generally high speed, much more smooth, big, looks like a U. Slow speed, going to look more like a V, generally speaking. And you're going to be wanting to compare your fastest 2 or 3 laps, looking at your gain and loss channel to kind of find your low-hanging fruit, and then you're going to pull up your speed trace, and you're going to use all of that together to find out what you're doing right, where to keep doing that, and the things that you can clean up and try to do better next time. All right, I will let Aric have the floor.
All right, here's the, let's see, I got to change this slide. Yeah, 15-minute time crunch. All right, so the general thing here is the way we've structured these slides is everything's incremental, right? So everything that you've done in looking at the 5-minute, time crunch, that Scott just kind of went through. This will be what you do in addition to the 5-minute time crunch, right? So you have that extra 10 minutes. What can you do in 10 minutes to actually make that data analysis session more valuable?
Yep. So we're going to look at card placement. Now, the huge caveat here is that when you're comparing, even within the same session, looking at card placement from one lap to another, let alone different sessions, is I don't trust GPS plots of cars. You've got to have a really expensive, really fancy GPS and a really great signal, which at a lot of these events we go to, cell signal satellite signal can be iffy sometimes. So I don't trust it to like get down to, wow, I was really using all the track out here, or I really got down to the apex. It won't show you that level of detail, but it can be of a really great use in wet conditions versus dry conditions. You can kind of see where you're blending in. If you're starting farther left than farther right for your brake zones, if you're traveling farther in before you start turning, things like that. This isn't a wet driving seminar, but still, that can help to identify the differences for you, especially if you're looking at other people's data as well, which again, we encourage you to do. Next is going to be throttle and RPM. My car does not take that very quickly, so it's not very helpful. But these same rules apply to your throttle inputs as they do your speed trace. You're looking for timing when you start accelerating. We're looking for severity, how much you accelerate. And if you do any like throttle lift, like kind of all the way out, that will show up. And then you are looking for the transitions. Again, as you pick it up, are you picking it up smooth and then going into a big braking zones? Are you doing a easy lift, or are you all the way off as quickly as possible? Things to take a look at. Finally, it's going to be the friction circle, which we're going to talk about that. You've heard it probably quite a lot, but we're going to show you why it's important here in just a moment. Man, it really wants me to buy this thing. I'll say maybe later. It's not going to be later. Spoiler alert. All right. So we're going to take a look at our... we're going to skip card placement again, just because of the reasons that I said. I don't trust it. But in kind of big sweeping terms, it can be helpful. Next, RPM. Again, can't really show it on my phone. If you've got an AIM or you have a fast refresh way to log it, it's going to be much more useful. Same rules for the throttle position apply just like they do to the speed. Timing, slope, shape. All right, so we're going to take a look at friction circle. So here, again, we're going to select our fastest lap, and then we're going to go past our speed trace, and we're going to go to our oh, wrong way. There we go. That looks more better. All right, we're going to go from our lateral to longitudinal G-trace. This simply shows how the car is loaded up at any given time. We still have this track map down here to kind of show us where we're at. But just to show you, for an example, we'll go into keyhole. So right about middle, you'll see, we're about middle for lateral. So as we go left versus right, that's how much the car is turning one way or another, or how much load it's experiencing. And as it goes up, that's acceleration forces, and as it goes down, that's braking forces. So as we approach keyhole, we're going straight, and then we're going to hit the brake, and we can see that drop down, right? So acceleration to braking should be pretty quick. Then it's going to transition over into our right-handed turn. It's going to come over here, and then it's going to hang out, and then as we accelerate, it's going to slowly blend back into center, and then we're going back down a straightaway. Now, things to note here. Again, we're not comparing, so we can't really look at timing necessarily, but we can look at slope and we can look at shape. So slope is going to be, we hit the brakes and we're hanging out down here. Now this is also colored by our apex score. So anything in green, we're really utilizing a lot of the tire's ability. If anything in orange and red, we're underdriving a little bit. So important to note, you'll see the dot under heavy braking, but then you'll see it come straight back up a little bit, really before we start turning. That means I'm coming off of the brake a little too early, then I start turning. Ideally, in another right-hander here, I'll fast forward a little bit. This one. Which one was it? Forget which one it was. But you, generally speaking, want to see this slope be farther down and farther to the outside. You can kind of see these ovals. You generally want to see it a little bit more out, a little bit more. So instead of braking and seeing that those dots come down and then straight back up before turning, you generally want to see this nice oval shape all the way out. Same if we take a look at turn 1 here. We can see the deceleration doesn't happen very much, so you can see I'm telling the truth, right? Data's great at telling the truth. I'm not braking here. So going into turn 1, lift, and then it does go straight over into the lateral G's and then back into acceleration. Now, the fun part. Let's bring in Tom's data here. So, Tom, apologies again. Tom is in red. I am in blue. So, coming into turn 1. It did it. Give me just a moment.
Yeah, I think the Apex Pro is scared of Tom O'Gorman's data. Every time you bring it up, it likes closing.
Yeah, I'm using an emulator on my computer to make them talk nicely to each other, and sometimes it works better than others. All right. Speed and then Tom's. All right. So, lateral versus. And this is why it's good to be familiar with your data system.
Yep.
All right. So, coming into turn 1, again, it'll be pretty obvious which one Tom is. Coming into turn 1, you can see timing. First thing we're going to look at, you can see mine moves first. I'm in blue, Tom is in red. You can see me only decelerate before I turn, but Tom's goes diagonal. So he is decelerating at the same time he is turning in. So one big important thing to note. So we kind of cross, and he does decelerate more, but is able then to carry more speed. And you can see he actually loads the car better than I do, that his little dot out there is farther away than mine is. So he's able to load and keep the car loaded quicker than I do. Same going into keyhole. You're going to see us brake at a very similar point. Tom actually brakes a touch sooner than me, but you can see that red dot. See how far it drops straight down to braking, moves to the right, and then all the way around that friction circle. That's very pretty to look at, people. So that's one of those shapes you really want to get familiar with. So come down, and then instead of coming back up like mine does and then over, you can see Tom heavy under braking and then immediately goes into lateral load, turning the car in and all the way over. Now keyhole does have some elevation, which is why it looks a little jumpy. And then they both come back. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to look at during your 15-minute lateral, longitudinal, friction circle thing. Same three things. When you're comparing, you're going to be looking at your timing. When things happen, it's clear that Tom was doing things at different times than I am. The slope or severity, we could see going into turn one, that Tom's deceleration rate was actually a little bit quicker than mine, but he did it later and he didn't hold it as long. And he was able to load up the car a lot more going through turn one, getting half a second on me in one turn and one straightaway. So that's your 15 minutes time crunch. That would be something, again, set your timer on your phone. Start it, take a look at it. Don't try to get into the super nitty-gritty details and stuff like that. Set your time limit, do what you can, come back later, try more next time. All right. I lost Aric's audio.
Sorry, I was talking on mute there. Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yep, you're back on.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, so 30-minute time crunch. As we mentioned before, this will add to the 15-minute time crunch. So generally what we're going to be looking at, and Scott will go through a little bit of these details, you're going to add more information and data analysis on your brake application release. I mentioned math channels before, a little bit of the scope of this particular presentation, but we'll probably do, follow-on presentation on braking, because that's, as I mentioned before, that's where a lot of the time can be gained on track. Lateral Gs, a little bit more level of details, looking at loads and corners, spikes, sudden changes, signs of underdriving. You'll see that, both in like the apex score where it's available, and also, if you're not moving out to the edge of the friction circle, as Scott was showing in the last. And then longitudinal Gs, very useful in brake analysis. But you can also look at that, even without an RPM channel, you can look at it, as far as like shifting strategies, how long is the driver taking to shift the car. You can also look at scenarios where your car might be down in power, right? Let's say you're 2-3 seconds off your lap times with no changes. What might have happened? Looking at acceleration curves might give you a key there. And then yaw rate and speed, as we mentioned before, steering input if that's available. And then video. I don't know, Scott, if you want to talk about the video kind of pros and cons while we're on this particular slide, or you want to do that once we're in the demo, but
yeah,
it would probably be a good time.
Yeah, so this is a pet peeve of mine, and I love people who are super excited to show me their video, and I really want to look at their video most of the time. But if it's video where I'm only looking out of a windshield, it's pretty to look at, and if it's got good audio, it might be great to listen to. However, it's not giving me anything. If I can't see what the car is doing, how it's pitching, rolling, things like that, and driver input, that is why we take video. So the three things to get into it is I want to be able to look over the driver's shoulder to be able to see the driver's head at least, out the front window, and hopefully out the side windows a little bit. What this does is it allows me to see the driver's head, is their head turning, allows me to see full clear out the windshield and out the side windows. This also should do at the same time, but be sure that it does, is that it should allow me to see what your hands are doing. Your speed, how smooth you are, timing, if you're shuffle steering. I've actually pointed out to a few longtime racers who still shuffle steer. It's wild out there. But something to do. Now, the real cherry on top of the cake here is that, can we see your feet? If you can get your camera in the correct position to where I can see out the front windshield and out the side windows, see your head, see your hands, and see your feet. That's the holy grail. It is perfect. Now, sometimes it can be really dark, and so something Nick Coors and I did, because he was driving in a full interior Civic with black fire suit and black shoes. You can't see anything that's going on down there. Is he had some of his gaffer tape in bright yellow green. And so I simply told him, put some of that tape on the toe of both of your feet. And it worked great. Jake mentioned you can put some great light underglow lighting under your dashboard. That would work perfect too. But if you can illuminate your feet, this really helps look at your throttle input. If you don't have that in data, now you do. You have it in your video. Can also see how you're heel and toeing if that's something you do. Brake application when you come off of the brake onto the gas, and vice versa. So take a little bit more care. Be sure your camera is in a good spot because video data is really good, and we'd love to be able to utilize it better. All right, let's take a look at our lateral G's. Is it going to, it is once again going to ask me if I want to buy it, and guess what? I still don't. All right, so we are going to go back. We are only going to look at my data to make it a little bit more clear. And we are going to move from our distance to speed down to our distance to longitudinal G. So distance is left to right, longitudinal G is top to bottom. The harder we brake, the farther down this graph goes. The harder we accelerate, the farther up. Somebody, of course, made the joke that my Miata is slow. You're not wrong. We just have way more ability to brake than we do to accelerate. So as we look at, we'll keep looking at keyhole because that's kind of where we've been focusing. Is again, you want to look at this timing and the severity. How hard am I braking? Decently hard, but you can also see I've got it colored over here by apex, and so I can see I'm not utilizing all the braking effort going into here. So nice and hard, but not as hard as it could be. Apologies. There we go. All right, so at the bottom you can see go on the brake and then a pretty quick release here. Now keyhole tends to be a little bit of a slower speed corner with a rise in it, so that would be something I would kind of expect, versus a corner more like China Beach, where it's a little bit slower of a release. Right through here, that's your trail brake. How it's slower, so that's oftentimes what you want to see in higher speed corners versus just that V shape that we see in keyhole. Now again, even higher speed corner like turn 1, you can see it, the slope isn't nearly as steep, so we're not decelerating as much, and a much more U shape at the bottom. So that is generally what you're going to be looking at when you're looking at our data traces. So lateral, or the longitudinal G, apologies, this is great to see how you're getting on the brakes and how you're releasing them, and how smooth you are in getting on the throttle, which you can even see here, not that smooth, right? You see how it's starting to come up and then it finally decides to go. So there was some indecision by me coming through China Beach there. All right, next one is going to be our lateral G's. So distance is left to right. Lateral G's is going to be up and down. Specifically, as we turn right, it's going to go up. As we turn left, it's going to go down. So these are our side-to-side forces that we experience in the car. Again, we're going to look at timing and slope. So how hard, how fast. You can see turn 1, again, high-speed corner. We would expect the slope to not be that steep. And a little bit more of a U-shape, just everything smoothing out a little bit more at speed. Versus going into keyhole, a little bit slower speed. Sure enough, we can see here our slope's a little bit steeper. We have a little bit of a wiggle right there, which is right when the crest happens. So it's not unusual for this particular corner. And then sloping back down. And then of course you get into the back section of Mid-Ohio, and then you go from one to another. And this can also point out if your transitions, if you're at a track that goes from right to left, things like that. Oftentimes what you'll see a driver do is turn really hard, straighten out, and then turn again, rather than turning, transition immediately. And this is one of those channels that will really help you identify when you're not using that nice kinetic energy that you can use with the springs, loading them up on one side and then bam, getting over to the other side. All right, and for giggles, we're going to add in toms here. So we're back to our longitudinal G. This is under braking. And just like we've seen, Tom does decelerate later, but more severely. And then it comes up. Now what's interesting to note is that Tom's data here is actually pretty V-shaped. So still some optimization that can be done by him. Granted, he drove my car for 5 minutes and this is what he did. So like, I think we can give Tom some grace here. Same thing coming into keyhole. We both brake with about the same force, but you can see how Tom actually starts releasing the brakes sooner than I do, carrying the speed a little bit more, and he does a nice rounded part. So still some optimization there to be done for him, but since he is carrying more speed in, it would be expected that he can't get back to throttle quite as sooner. Continues on. So that's how to take a look at longitudinal G. I'd really like to use this channel for brake application and brake release. It's very telling. Again, data tells you what's happening and it's honest about it. So you can always always trust data to be bluntly honest. All right, same thing with lateral Gs, and I really like to use these in between corners. So timing, slope, transition. So one area we didn't look at, but I think highlights it well, is the difference that Tom and I did in between China Beach and Madness. You can see this is a right-hand turn, loads it up, and then time, you can see me start to turn sooner than Tom, but look at the slope difference here. Tom transitions the car much harder into the left-hander known as Madness. So he really uses all of that energy coming out of China Beach to load the car up and then immediately transfer it over, catch it, make it over. And Tom did, this was one of the major areas Tom also gained time on me, and this would be one of the reasons why. All right, we'll take a look at yaw speed briefly. If this is getting really thick, I totally get it. This is why this is in the 30 minutes, and even, again, in 30 minutes, if you don't have time, or if you think something else is going to be more valuable to you, go do the things that you think are going to be more valuable. This is all stuff that you can do, not stuff that you have to do. Okay, you're not a loser if you don't. All right, so distance, we're going to scroll all the way down here to yaw rate. So distance, again, left to right, yaw rate up and down. And it's going to be, here we go. So down is going to be our left-handers. Up is going to be our right-handers. And this is simply how fast the car is turning if you look at it from the bird's eye view. So we can see in our slow speed or in our high speed corners, again, it's expected that we're not going to be rotating the car as quickly. And we can in fact see that. So we're turning about 20 degrees a second. That doesn't mean a whole lot to you. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Just know that you're not rotating the car as quickly in high speeds as you do in low speeds. Coming back up here to keyhole, all of a sudden you can see the difference. And interesting to note, going into the keyhole, you can see Tom starts getting the car rotated much sooner than I do. Tom's in red, I'm in blue. So I've got to do a lot of rotation here really quick, and then I catch it, then I turn some more, and then I start to straighten it out. Where Tom starts to get the car rotated really nice and early, and he waits to a more appropriate moment to get the car really rotated, turned, so that he can pick up the throttle and get going again. Looks like I had to fix it. Tom did. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So yaw rate can be very helpful in helping to identify when high speed versus low speed at a particular track, or your particular strengths and weaknesses as a driver. A lot of us have a hard time in high speed corners. And if we're trying to rotate the car at the same speed going into a high speed corner that we are into a low speed corner, it's no wonder you're more nervous. It's just going to be a lower rotation rate. So those are going to be the major things. And then, of course, the video review, we're not really going to talk about that, but video review is really good. Generally, if somebody comes up to me and I've got 15, 20 minutes to take a look, and they say, do you want to look at data or do you want to look at video? If it's good video, I'll generally want to look at the video over data. But if it's me personally, I'll look at both if I've got the time. So. All right, let's get into the last section here.
Oop, I gotta change the slide. All right, yeah, so this is the between event crunch. And I do want to highlight again, the best time to do this is right after the event. You're going to be more familiar with the track, more familiar with what you did. You can probably even remember specific laps and things that happened out on track. Scott kind of left the last, the 30-minute time crunch, talking about VO, and covered basically a lot of these points here, right? So I won't repeat them, but we did want to talk just briefly about things that you can do if you're racing wheel to wheel or time attack or time trial, just to kind of highlight what you can add to the 30-minute time crunch within the less time dependent constraints of being after events. You want to do the wheel-to-wheel one real quick, Scott?
Yes. So I'm giving somebody a heart emoji. So yeah, in wheel-to-wheel, the real key areas in video is going to be your starts. Take a look at how you're stacked up. Take a look at your mirrors. Video is great if you can also capture your mirrors. There's a lot to get in like one frame. I get it. But sometimes there's a real sweet spot. And if you take some time and really playing around with your camera angle, you can get this. Take a look at where people are moving, kind of how you set things up. Also good to take a look at how you set up passes and how you set up being passed. Um, I've had some real races where I really like and enjoy driving in the rain, and I tend to overperform in rain races, and I'm a little bit slower in the pack in dry races. So if we have a dry race right after a wet race, I'm generally going to be getting past more than doing the passing. And so I found that there's a real art in being passed in a way that doesn't affect your lap time as much. It may sound weird, but it's a big deal, especially in endurance racing when you're trying to keep your speed up and things. Um, and then, yeah, your starts, see how you're patient, sometimes even by your hand movement, your head movement, things like that. You can see when you're getting frustrated, and you can see your decision making when you're not in the moment. So you can really reflect a little bit clearer on all of that. Good?
All right, time for time attack, time trial.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just yeah, 3 bullets here. Just wanted to highlight a few things, right? So, one thing that's different in time attack or time trial versus wheel to wheel is you can always drive the line, right? Unless you're actually passing or being passed, but it's a completely different scenario. You're not doing that for position on track, obviously. So the vast majority of the time you're driving on the line, right? So optimizing that, optimizing also the line as a function of what kind of car you're driving is important. If your car has a lot of aero versus not, car placement and where you are on the track can be important. Looking at flow sections and momentum, we've kind of highlighted this before, right? I mean, your lap time is basically made and lost by, how fast you're going in the faster sections, right? I mean, you can see, literally a second gain, improvement on a lap time if you're able to eke out, just a couple miles per hour through a high-speed turn, for example, on a lot of the courses that time attackers typically, drive on. Outlaps and strategy. Time attack is obviously pretty unique in that, depending on the car or the event, you're only going to have a few laps to get your best time, especially with some of the higher horsepower cars that are cooling limited or tire limited. Strategy on how you actually get to your fast lap quickly is going to be important. Also, quick laps, early on in a session are important from a time attack perspective. Because it's I think it's gotten better in the last 5-6 years, but especially at the pointy end of the time attack fields, you're going to have cars that are prone to breaking down, right? So if you can get an early lap in that's quick, you should always try to do that. And how do you do that? I mean, I don't think we have anything queued up in this particular presentation to show that, but it's to get your tires up to temp quickly. There's some techniques and methods to do that. We'll probably go over some of those in follow-on sessions, but and being aggressive right out of the gate. I mean, this is more analogous to like an autocross type mentality as just going out and lapping your car. Like if you're in an HPDE where you can kind of slowly build up speed, you don't really have to worry so much about tire temperatures coming up quickly. It's much more important to do that in be aggressive early on in time attack for all the reasons that I mentioned.
Yes.
All right, and I think that's our last slide, Scott.
Correct. I've got some data I want to look at here just real quick.
Okay. All right.
And hopefully, man, it's like every time. Do you want to purchase? Nope. All right. Oh, I just shared my screen of my screen. It's pretty meta of me. All right. A last note about the video. It's great to look at your head movement as well. Is your head moving before the corner? Oftentimes what I'll actually see is drivers will be looking ahead, but their head won't actually turn. So their field of vision is pretty narrow off to one side. So you can see, are you looking before you turn? And especially like at Mid-Ohio in those turny flow sections, can you turn left and then look right before your hands follow you? It's a great thing to spot in video. All right. In between events, use your friction circle, use your longitudinal G's. I've seen some comments in the chat that you guys about your braking technique and things like that. Notice the kinds of corners and how you generally release the pedal and how you would like to try to do it at your next event. Be intentional about it. So if you're coming from a place like Mid-Ohio going to Gingerman, think ahead. Okay, my tendency in these high-speed corners is to do this, and low speed is to tend to do this. So at Gingerman, where might I want to approach braking into turn 1, which is kind of a fast downhill off-camber corner? Where do I want to and how do I want to brake going into turn 3? You've got the data to see what you have been doing. Use it, interpret it, figure out what you would like to try for next time. Lastly, what we are looking at right now is a pair of channels. It's our lateral G's, which here is going to be left and right, versus our speed, which is top to bottom. This is great to see which side of the car gets worked more. So especially if you're looking at doing alignment, setting up your car, and looking at aero, this is a great thing to look at. So we can see all of our turns happen under 90 miles an hour. And actually our fastest turn is turn 1. And we are traveling at 86 miles an hour, right around there. That's the fastest corner. Another note is, generally speaking, your lateral load, or how far out this dot is, should be able to go farther out. You should be able to load the car more at high speed than you can in low speed. So what this tells me is that if you look straight down from this blue dot where it's selected now, you can see there's a 50 mile an hour left-hand turn that loads the car the exact same amount as this 85 mile an hour high-speed turn. Something's up there. And as we know, and as we saw from Tom, the car has more in it at those high speeds. Let me turn it here for you. The car has...
And just to clarify that too, Scott, that does depend on the car to a certain extent, but generally you're going to see that with the car that's prepped on track that has a little bit of aero, right? Higher speed, the potential to generate higher lateral forces is generally there.
Correct. And something I won't get into right here, but this can also be good to know which side of the car, which corner of the car is going to get worked. The slower speed it is, generally it's going to be working the fronts more, and then you can see where the corners come and how much time you spend in corners. So we can see in here, if I'm able to pull my map down here, let's try that. In our right-handed, we've got a lot of right-handed corners at slow speed. So that front left at Mid-Ohio is going to get worked a little bit more than the other corners. So take note, good thing to check and just be aware of going into your next event. So that's what we've got. I think for me, the big ideas here are going to be how you look at your data. Do it with people and then set your timer. Put aside your time. If you've got 5 minutes, set your timer. 15, 30, whatever it is. Put the time in, but then be done with it. It'll help give you more energy to go do other things and actually use, because you can't go from one session into another with 10 things in your mind. It's not how it works. Come into it with a few low-hanging fruit. Go from there. The other is when you look at data, it's going to be your timing, it's going to be your slope, and it's going to be your transitions. Then in terms of questions, Aric, did you see questions that we needed to...
Yeah, I was going back through the chat. I didn't see anything that we didn't address, at least in passing, if there are any other questions that we did miss, or if you have anything, I see a couple people are typing here now. We can hang out for probably another, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. I mean, it'll put us at 2 hours. I know that's a long time, but let's give people value for their money, right?
Yeah, I see Rory did ask, I know you answered, would you say being able to see a driver's feet in video is less critical if you have a high resolution data overlaid for accelerator position and brake pressure? Sure. Yeah, 6-1 at that point. As long as visually you can kind of pick up all those signals, might take a little bit of practice for you, but if it's showing you the same stuff, like you said, at that high resolution, which mine does not have, then yeah, I wouldn't see why that wouldn't be a bad thing. Saw some people who wanted to talk a lot more about braking. Everybody wants to talk about braking because
Yeah.
we're all a thing. Integrating with track maps, Bill asked. Yes. Again, I'm a big fan of taking notes and things like that. So as you're looking at data, if you've got a paper track map right next to you, make a note. Here's what I was doing. Here's what I want to do. It's really about being intentional. Just don't go out and try to drive faster. That falls into that I'm just going to try harder phase, and that generally doesn't work out well for many people. So writing notes, and knowing your references as well. This is kind of getting into some coaching things. If you have references, so I start braking here. Next one, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to brake a little bit less. So if I was braking at full brake 10 brake pedal, out of 10 out of 10. But this time I'm going to try an 8 out of 10. Or maybe I'm just going to try to brake 10 feet later. Give it a try. Massively important aspect of the data is that reference lab. As a person on track, how best to get that? All low-hanging fruit. Jake, I do feel, and this is personally, reference labs can be very helpful to see what your car is capable of doing, but I find it less helpful to see what you as a driver need to do. Because I've seen 3-4 different people drive the same car very differently to very similar lap times. So the things that comparing my data to Tom's data, Tom was great at showing me that my car going into turn 1 has a lot more capability than I was putting into it. Now, do I want to do it the same way that Tom does? So all I need to do is decel less, turn the car harder, and just do it, right? Because that's what Tom does it. Maybe. But again, take it as descriptive. Tom is doing this. I am doing that, but not necessarily that prescription. Not necessarily Tom is faster here, so I need to do that. It's capabilities versus approach. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at that. And I think just kind of add to what Scott was saying too. I mean, a lot of times, especially if, I'm kind of fixating on your last comment there where it says you're all low hanging fruit. If you're good at looking at data, or if you get good at looking at data, you're going to be able to tell, even without a reference lap where you need to work on things. When you get to the point where you're looking for tenths or you're looking at, basically making the most out of your car, having somebody drive your car, or even doing simulated laps, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I've done, from time to time over the years. If you're at a track and you don't have any reference data, so you really have nothing to compare it to, there are some simulation tools out there. And I have kind of one of my own that I used to use when I was under the Speed Street brand. Still have access to it, but you can do simulation laps too, just to kind of as a sanity check what your car should do. There's no substitute for actually having a real driver drive your car, though. But again, as Scott mentioned, it's not always necessary. It's really more at looking at car capabilities versus your approach to driving, like Jake mentioned in his follow-up.
And if anybody wants to ask a question live, we can bring you on video here as well.
Yeah, we could do that too. Yeah.
Peter did mention a very good point as well. If you don't have a reference lap or something like that, a great way to see if you are underdriving the car, if you have the Apex Pro, is that Apex score. Again, it will tell you if you are utilizing all of the tires capabilities or not. The other thing to look at is going to be your longitudinal and your lateral Gs. So if you are able to generate, say, 1G going right and then zero point 0.9 going left, might want to take a look at that. Might mean that the car is capable of more in that corner and you're just not quite getting it there. So take a look. How are you approaching it? How can you try to do things differently? Again, data tells you what's happening, not necessarily what you need to do, but it can be very useful in showing one car versus another, or even you versus yourself. If you were able to outbrake yourself going into one corner versus another, might be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, and Robert makes a good point too, right? A lot of that, I mean, you can see setup differences sometimes in in data. There's also going to be tracks that are very dependent on direction of travel too, right? Like for example, like Lime Rock, where almost all corners except for one are in one direction. There's a lot of people that do asymmetrical car setups for that reason, right? Basically, that whatever you're losing by doing that in the one turn that you're going the opposite direction of the other ones, you can set your car up to kind of optimize lap times based on that. So that's another good diagnostic tool. If you're not getting equal lateral Gs, for example, I mean, it'll help you potentially determine whether it's a car setup or a driver issue, those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Jake, yes, we Becky and I did put a asymmetrical setup, we'll say, on Mooncake at Lime Rock in the paddock, and it was it worked well. We just needed more, so data was good for that. So yes, very good point, Robert. Otherwise, don't want to keep you guys here longer than we need to. So we really appreciate your time, your willingness to hang out with us. I will be uploading this probably tomorrow. Again, if you have questions, type them in and we'll get to them. I'll just keep vamping here for a moment. We'll upload it, give you guys access. It will be a private video, so you guys will have access. We will send you the slides, and any feedback you guys have, please email us. And we would love to hear what you guys think, or what you want to talk about next, and kind of all that stuff. So there was something about an interpretive dance. No, there's none of that here today, sir.
Maybe next time if we're not talking as much, right?
Yeah, sure. So again, appreciate your time, appreciate your willingness to hang out with us. Reach out, email, or socials. We'll send out all that good info and whatnot as well. So that's all I got, Aric.
I think, thanks for all the positive compliments and comments in the chat here towards the end. Hopefully this is useful, and like we mentioned a couple times, and we'll probably be doing some follow-ups, on different topics, trying to keep things topical, trying to keep things as, general as possible, but we may dig into, kind of a little bit more esoteric topics as they, as they come about too. But I appreciate all the attention and, all the positive comments. It's definitely been fun for us. So hopefully it's been useful for you guys as well.
And we will be out at a bunch of different events. So if there's anything that we can do to help, reach out. I do coaching and data stuff. Aric does coaching and data and setup stuff and all that whatnot. So again, like if there's video or data, or you just like have a question, like come talk to us. We like to do this stuff, and it's great. Again, something best to be done with people, and can make it a lot more fun. So
Yep, for sure.
I'm going to stop vamping. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. And yeah, look out for an email. We'll send you more stuff. We sent out some details on the discounts that you all got as well. So anything we can do, reach out. We'll go from there.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Have a great night. We'll talk to you later.